gonna get started. Oh, man, I don't smell that bad. You can get closer to me. I'm used to having guys up here that we kind of cuddle together like this, you know. No. Hey, man, thank you. I know. We haven't even fished together yet.
We got to fish first when cuddle.
Yeah. That's pretty good rule.
Same.
We'll have to install. I'm gonna have to install that rule in my personal life. I believe we can't cuddle till we fish. I like that.
That's right.
That's a good one. Thank y'all for coming out tonight, man. I see some new faces in the crowd. I really appreciate you guys showing up tonight. It's a awesome time of year to be thinking about fishing. Fall's always been near and dear to my heart. It's always had a special place for me because growing up, I did a little bit of everything in the outdoors, hunting of all kinds, fishing and all that. But, man, pretty much since I've been an adult, I've been kind of a one-trick. I've been obsessed with one thing, and that's bass fishing. People ask me about, I have customers all the time asking me about, hey, how's the crappie fishing out here? How's the cat fishing out here? I'm like, I hear it's good. I'm the worst person to ask because I never even think about anything other than bass fishing. But fall is great because the fish bite. Some of the very best days of your bass fishing life will absolutely come in the fall if you spend time on the water that time of year. And on top of that, there's just not as many boats. Like when you get to springtime, everywhere you go is kind of crowded and all that. Man, you can have some days out here in the fall where they're chewing and you don't really see a whole lot of people even on Lake Fork. So fall, I've always loved it, man. You can kind of run around. You don't have to. You fish this lake enough, you'll understand what I mean when I say sometimes out here you got to play defense. Like, they may not be just biting in this area right here, but I'm going to stay in this area right here because I don't want nobody else coming here and catch these fish when they turn on. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes you have to play a little defense out here and think strategically about where you fish and when. And in fall, you don't have to worry about any of that. You just kind of run and fish wherever you want to. There's plenty of open places. And it's a great, great, great time of year. And tonight, we're going to talk about some stuff that I've been getting asked a lot of questions about different baits. What baits to use during the fall? Does this bait work good right now? Does this bait work good for the fall period? So I'm going to dig in on bait selection and kind of how we go about choosing them and why, all the reasons why. Before we do that, I want to obviously give a shout out to Lake Fork Marina. They always let us host these events here. We thank them very much for that. Just some of the finest people that you'll ever meet, the people that run this operation. And the Berkeley tournament's coming up. It's kind of tournament season. We just had the Sealy Outdoors tournament last week. We've got some construction contractor company down here, Texo or something like that. They've got like 200 people down here for a tournament this week. And then the Berkeley tournament's coming up here in a few more weeks, I think October 16th or something like that. Well, Lake Fork Marina hosts the Berkeley tournament every year. And if you guys will look down in this, if you go down the stairs and go to your left, you'll see that's the biggest, broadest selection of Berkeley baits you'll ever find. And when we talk about the Berkeley tournament, for those that don't know, if you're interested in coming out, you can only fish Berkeley baits or Pure Fishing Baits, the company that owns them. So you're limited on what baits you can use in that tournament. And if you want to fish that tournament, it's a great event, great payouts. It's put on by Bass Champs. They do a phenomenal job. And really good event to fish, but you need some Berkeley baits if you're going to fish it.
Baits right now.
It is. And some baits are hard to find right now. Yeah, of all kinds this year, right? And downstairs, they have got by far the best selection of Berkeley baits you'll find anywhere on earth, even over like Tackle Warehouse or something. It's insane, the selection they keep down there. So plenty of Berkeley baits. If you guys are coming out to fish the Berkeley tournament, hit up Lake Fork Marina. That's the place you want to look. There might be, they got stuff down there I didn't even know Berkeley made. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't have any idea of some of the different variety of baits that they have. So they got a lot of good stuff down there. But speaking of that, man, I love it. Like, I love, we just talked about how the lake gets less crowded in fall. But I love seeing the business out here. I love seeing the Sealy tournament. I love seeing this. I've never even heard of this Texo tournament. I think this is the first time they've done it. It's awesome to come out here to Lake Fork and see so many people here every weekend in a time of year where it's not always crowded. And the Berkeley tournament will draw a lot of people. And it's not just great. It's great to look at that and say, well, all these fine people, like the folks that own and operate Lake Fork Marina, they're getting the benefit of all this traffic. But beyond that, it does my heart a lot of good. As much as I talked about it's nice to have the lake kind of not as crowded, it does my heart really, really good to see the lake get crowded. Because this water out here has changed my life. And, we can talk all night about what this lake has done for me personally. But it's changed my life for the better in a lot of ways, in a lot of big, big ways. And so I love seeing this many people out here and getting to experience what I've experienced out here. And it's a special place. It's a special fishery. It has its ups and downs. These fish can be real tough to catch on Lake Fork with all the pressure. But there's nobody that's ever come here that you step out of your truck and it's like you just feel it. Like you can just feel that's a different lake. It's not like any other lake you go to. When you get out of the truck here, there's an aura in the air. You get a little nervous every time you launch your boat. Like the idea of what's swimming under the water and how big some of these bass are on average out here, it's just, I've never been anywhere and experienced anything like Lake Fork. So I love seeing all the people being able to experience that out here. That being said, conditions are, it's fall, and it's fall early. I mean, it's September 20-something today. I don't know. I'm not real good at that. I know I'm going fishing. That's about all I know. I'm never really sure what day it is, but we're early. Like, the water temp was 73, 74 last couple days. Man, that's like mid to late October water temps at best. Heck, last couple of years, middle of October, the water's still been in the mid 80s in the middle of October. And here we are at the end of September, we've got water that low already. A lot of things have happened to create that. We could, again, that's something we can sit here and talk a long time about, but just for time constraints, we'll just move forward. It is what it is. We've got the kind of prime fall temperatures. Now, they've gotten there really fast. They got there in just a few days. The water temp dropped about 8 degrees in a few days at the beginning of this week. And that has created a situation where everything's telling you it's go time, it's go time, it's go time. You see the bait up on the bank flicking around. You'll see some smaller bass chasing the bait all over the place on the bank, really getting active, starting about a top water a little bit, stuff like that. It's going on. So you see all that, you see that water temp, and you're like, man, we ought to just be wearing them out up shallow. And in the right place at the right time, you can. But they haven't all had time to kind of get where they're going yet, if that makes sense. So we still have some fish that were further out in the transition that haven't set up in the creeks, or some of them haven't set up offshore. There's some offshore fish starting to set back up. This happens every year in the fall. We get turnover, boom, all the fish scatter, spread out all over the bank, all over the main lake, the creeks. They kind of scatter all across the bank when you have turnover. Then as you get away from turnover and the temps start cooling, some of the shad and some of the bass will pull into pockets and creeks and gather up in those areas and go to feeding, and some of them will gather back out on main lake structure. You always have kind of a two-way go in the fall on Lake Fork. So we're right at the beginning stages of that, even though the water temps and your eyes tell you we should be in like the meat of the fall bite. They just haven't had enough time to really get gathered and get going, but they're on their way and it's starting to happen. So these next couple weeks, especially if it doesn't just get back in the 90s or something crazy heat-wise, if the highs for the day stay in the 80s and 70s like they're forecasted to do, man, these next couple weeks, it's fixing to get like crazy good out here. One thing I'll warn you about when you're talking about fall bass fishing in general, you can miss them as easy as you can find them in fall. There's fish, when they start gathering up, that leaves a whole lot more water with nothing in it, if that makes sense. So when you go out fishing in the fall and you're going along throwing a square bill, spinner bait, whatever you're throwing, swim bait, whatever you're throwing, you got a little shad pattern bait, you just got to keep moving, guys. Don't get discouraged if you fish for a couple hours and you've got nothing going. That is common in the fall to have periods of time where you're missing the boat. But when you find the right area at the right time, it's like, whoo, the numbers are better in the fall than they are. Like, you'll catch more fish in a short period of time in the fall than any other time of year. The schools that will accumulate offshore over the next month will be the biggest offshore schools of the entire year. It's every year it's that way. So don't get discouraged by having some slow times in the fall. You just got to keep hunting them down. Keep hunting them down. And there can be some randomness to fall fishing, right? One of the things that's a big deal in fall is it's all about bait and primarily shad. It's all about shad this time of year. Well, if you ever talk to anybody that fishes these blueback herring lakes, these really, really migratory bait fish type lakes, like Lake Hartwell in South Carolina is famous for this. They got these big schools of blueback herring. They don't have a lot of cover and structure in the water. It's not a heavily wooded lake like we have out here in East Texas. So those bass, when they lock in on just the bait fish, they move and they roam and they follow these bait fish wherever they go. That's what happens to every lake in the fall. They get so locked in on these shad, and that's the only thing they're keying in on, that they will move around on you day to day. So that's why you have to just keep going. When you can't find them, you're not catching them, you just got to keep rolling with it, man. Just keep keep plugging away. But then when you find that bait and those bass together, it's like open the floodgate. So it's a really awesome time of year. Now, one of the most challenging things to do at times can be to figure out what it is they want to bite around that massive amount of bait fish. It's challenging, because they have so much bait fish present right on top of them. What's up, Cody? They have so much bait fish present right in their immediate area that it can be hard to make your presentation stand out enough for them to bite. What you doing, boy? Big Bryce. Hey, are them donuts for me?
Nope.
No. No. All right.
You bring no fishing line?
He'll be getting some at some point. I guarantee you that little sucker. That little sucker's all about them fishing lures. He's got donuts. You gonna share them donuts with Ethan? That's Ethan right there. Yes, that's a good boy. That's a good boy, Bryce. All right. It can be hard to pick what baits you want to use because it's hard to make, they've got so much to eat. It's like they don't have to eat your bait. They've got like this big giant buffet grouped up for them by the conditions. And who's ever fished around school and fishing, you can't get them to bite? Anybody ever experienced that? Everybody shaking their head, raising their hand, kind of giggling. Happens all the time, right? It can be challenging at times to figure out how to get a fish to bite when he's got unlimited food source. In my opinion, one of the reasons Lake Fork can be so tough is because if you ever go out and just graph all around in the middle of Lake Fork, there's bait fish everywhere. And not only do they have shad everywhere you look, but they've also got brim, and they've got little baby crappie and yellow bass and white bass, and they've got so much food in this lake. That's one of the reasons I think Lake Fork bass can be tougher to catch than any of our other lakes around here for sure. It is. It's a lot more challenging day in, day out to catch these fish than it is any other lake that I go to around here.
We've done a bunch of gizzard shad lately.
Bunch of gizzard shad? Yeah. And they've just got so many options. And in the fall, when all that stuff gets grouped up, man, they just tee off on it. Now, it's the most frustrating thing in the world to be around fish that you can visibly see feeding and you can't get them to bite. Okay? What I will tell you about that is don't overthink it. Okay? Don't overthink it. You want to try to mimic basically the size of bait that's in that area. So what Joe just said, you've been seeing some big gizzard shad.
Gizzard, yeah.
So when you see big gizzard shad, you're going to want to pick baits that are about that size. You're going to want to pick maybe a chatterbait. Chatterbait with a trailer's got a little bit longer profile, right? A 5 or 6 inch swim bait for a gizzard shad. Big rattle trap. That's a great idea.
Big mega rattle trap.
A rattle trap always presents itself as bigger than it is because it vibrates so hard, right? So a bigger rattle trap like the 3/4 ounce, something like that. Yeah, that's a great idea. The bigger, now we have these oversized. Back in the day, all we had was the 1.5 size square bills. Anybody remember that? Those things look like they're crappie baits now.
Yeah.
Because we're all used to throwing these 2.5 or like the 200 series and the mega square bills. If you go pick up like an old school regular like 50 size square bill, it looks like a crappie bait now.
Yeah, a little bit.
So you have those big square bills. That's another great option. But that's a big deal to me. There's kind of two really key factors, and then I want your feedback on this. For me in the fall, the two biggest factors to bait selection. He's talking about those bullets. Dad, he got them Nerf bullets. He's pretty serious about them Nerf bullets now. I just thought I was missing out on something. I had to stop for a minute. I didn't know what he was pulling out of his pocket. Top secret fishing baits coming out over there. Have you ever caught any fish on those Nerf bullets?
A tiny bit.
A tiny bit? He's a fisherman, folks. He's full of it. No, the two biggest factors in the fall for bait selection is going to be the size profile of the shad you're around, and then efficiency for the area you're fishing. And what I mean by that is, if you're fishing brush piles, well, you need something you can get in and out of the brush consistently. A jig, a worm, Texas rig, something, a crankbait that deflects really good. If you're fishing grass, well, that square bill probably ain't gonna be what you want to reach for.
Nope.
You're gonna want a weedless swim bait or a chatterbait or a lipless crankbait that rips out of the grass really good. That's the right size that can stay above it. It's just those two things are really all I focus on. Okay, when I'm picking a bait for fall fishing, size profile, the efficiency at which I can fish it. Because to find these fish that are moving around every day, you've got to cover a lot of water, guys. You got to really cover the water. And in order to cover water, you can't be getting hung up all day. There's nothing worse than when you're going down a bank and you're clicking and popping, getting it going, and you're covering water, and then your partner gets hung up, you got to turn the boat around and go back and get it, right?
Oh, yeah.
You know, when that keeps happening, and that starts happening a bunch of times throughout the day because you pick the wrong bait for the cover you're fishing, it's really going to restrict how much ground you cover, and it can really make this kind of difference. You're getting hung up a lot. You're not covering the water. You go home at the end of the day, you catch a couple fish, you never find that group. Or you fish efficiently because you pick the right bait for the cover you're fishing. You cover a lot more water, and at some point you find that group that you catch 45 out of. That happens in the fall, where you cover ground forever, catch nothing, and then catch 45 in one area. That is very much a real thing in the fall. It sounds crazy to say 45 out of one area, but on these big lakes that have the population of bass they have, this time of year, it is 100% a very real possibility. And literally picking the right bait, not where you fish, none of that, but picking the right bait. And I'm not talking about, well, it's got to be the perfect color, it got to be the perfect, just picking something that you can be super efficient with that allows you to cover enough ground to get to that group of fish can be the biggest difference in fall fishing. Well, what are you looking for when you got to pick baits for the fall? What are you thinking about?
I look for the bait, like you said. I've been fishing a lot of schools lately, chasing schools, throwing big rattle traps.
Seeing the surface activity? Yeah. So you're really just looking for, to me, the size profile is so much more important,
Well, obviously when I see them, a lot of it, they push them up on the banks, so then we see
you'll see them fly out of the water, yeah.
So we know, little one, big one, whatever. So I've been throwing a lot of square bills, a lot of rattle traps.
Yeah.
Versus, like you said, the size of the bait versus what I choose. But,
yes.
But a lot of them has been a little old fingerlings, little
thumbnail shad.
So it's hard to throw something to compare with that.
Right. Well, one thing I like to do is if I do find those little shad, that's a great point right there. Man, it can be hard sometimes when you find these, and this time of year, especially early in the fall, you'll find these massive groups of little bitty shad, and even the bigger bass will definitely key in on those at times this time in the early fall. That's hard to match a bait to a bait fish that's this long. We don't have a lot of bass fishing options that are this big. A 1/4 ounce trap's pretty good. A little bitty square bill's pretty good. Well, what used to not be a little square bill, but now it's a little square bill. It's pretty good for that. One of my favorite things is those weedless underspins with a little 3-inch swim bait. Yeah, the swim bait's a little bit bigger than the shad you're looking at, but hey, these bass ain't got rulers in their pockets. If it's close enough for them. But what I really like about those underspins is that little blade that hangs underneath that underspin looks exactly like those little shad that are flicking around up there on the surface that you see. So those little weedless underspins are a great tool. Plus, you know what else is great about a weedless underspin? You can throw it through whatever kind of cover you want to, right? You can throw it through grass, you can throw it through timber, you can throw it around, you can throw it wherever you want to throw it. And it's not going to get hung up, relatively speaking. It's as weedless a bait as you can really find for a moving bait. So those are really great. Top waters. You can get the 1/4 ounce poppers that have the feather on the back. And maybe the little popper is a little, like the swim bait, a little bit bigger than the shad you're looking at. But that feather that's doing this on the back and flipping all around on the surface looks exactly like those little thumbnail shad. So you really got to think about that when you're if you see those thumbnail shad and you see them getting scattered and blown up, don't think, well, that's just little fish. I'm here to tell you, I've caught some giant fish on some little bitty baits, especially early in the fall period. One of the longest fish I've ever caught in my life on Lake Fork was almost 28 inches long. It was 27 and change. It was over 27 and a half. Now, it didn't weigh a lot. It was really old fish that was really poor, so it wasn't the heaviest fish I've ever caught by any means. But I caught it on another bait that I like throwing around, little bait, a little 1/4 ounce spinner bait with the smallest willow blade I can find. Again, the spinner bait's a little bit bigger than the shad, but the blade itself looks exactly like those little shad. And so there's absolutely some giant bass, especially right during the turnover, right after the turnover, kind of going into now. Man, I'm telling y'all, you're missing the boat if you think it's just little bass eating those little shad. There is little bass eating those little shad. And every year in September, it's notorious in East Texas, we catch a lot of these little rats, these little 8, 10, 12-inch fish. You see a lot of those. You know what that is out here, guys? Out here, those 8 to 10-inch fish, they were born in the spring. You know, these fish on these lakes that are so fertile can grow that fast. And so that's why you get so many of those fish show up on the bank in September. Is it's the first time they have that massive shad gathering up shallow where they're wanting to live, and they can tee off on them. They've never seen that before, and they're going crazy. You can catch tons of them, especially like when you're throwing like the little treble hook baits, like the top waters and the traps. You will catch those little bass that are like not much longer than your hand. And then once in a while, you'll also catch the one that is big enough to eat all those little bass that's in there with them. You know, it's a weird time of year early in the fall. And even throughout the fall, fish get super mixed up. That's another fall trait. Not only by size, but even by species, the fish will intermingle more in the fall than any other time of year. In the summertime, if I'm fishing offshore and I'm catching 2-pounders, I'm going to go look for a different school. And try, unless I'm fishing a tournament when I need a 16-inch under, right? That's a whole different ball game, right? But no, like for on a guide trip, if I'm catching 1 to 2 pound bass, I'm going to leave that school in the summer and go try to find a school of bigger fish because they do tend to group by size. But for whatever reason in the fall, man, everything gets mixed up. I've literally sat on one offshore spot in the fall and caught a yellow bass, a white bass, a catfish, a crappie, a small largemouth, a big largemouth, like everything. Everything that swims out here that eats anything that looks like a shad, they all get together on the same spot in the fall. And it's the only time of year they really do that. You might find some white bass with some largemouth here and there throughout the year, but not like in the fall where it's all the species together. So don't get discouraged by signs of little fish. They can all be in the same spot. In the fall, your goal should be to set the hook as many times as you can. Cover as much water till you start catching a bunch, and then set the hook as many times as you can. Weed through them little ones, and big ones are in there too. So you've just been chasing schooling fish pretty much?
Pretty much.
Yeah?
Yeah. It's easy right now. They're everywhere.
What do you do? I mean, you just get in an area that you're confident in, put the trolling motor down and cover water? How are you going about it?
Yeah, well, so I found a spot where it's real shallow. It's about a foot of water, and it's a shallow, sandy bank.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time in the morning, the same time evening, every day they're pushing up. Mm-hmm. And when they push up, we, go to catch a bunch of 3 to 5 pound fish, just one after another. But I got a couple of spots, it's a bunch of timber, but it's the same kind of deal. It's got that real quick slope, the sandy bank, and that they just seem to push up, same time on the same spot. So I pretty much found the same spot on the lake. I've graphed it and found a bunch of places with the same kind of cover. So that's what I'm fishing is the anything with a sandy bank that comes off to some with cover, a bunch of trees or. The one spot over there is just a sandy bank. There's no reason why they'd be there. It's just sand, but they just love to push up.
It's the hardest time of year for me to give you guys, or for us to give you guys, a piece of structure or a type of area to key in on.
Anywhere right now.
Because they're moving, especially early in the fall. They're moving so much in this kind of summer to fall transition, and they start focus. Like I said earlier, they focus on these bait fish, and they move around daily.
Yeah.
And if those bait fish, and you think bass are dumb, shad are real dumb. Like, they do a lot of stuff for no reasons all the time. They can wander anywhere this time of year. The entire water column is the same temperature after the turnover. So there's nothing to push them down or push them up. They can be mid-depth, shallow, deep. They can be anywhere they want to be once the turnover is done, because all the water temp's the same, the oxygen content's the same. And those shad can just wander all around in numbers because they're grouped up, so they got defense in numbers, and they wander everywhere, and these bass just follow them. And so it's really, really difficult for us as we're sitting up here trying to help you guys, to tell you exactly where to fish in the fall. And to me, I think that's probably the number one reason why it's so important to be so efficient, because the possibilities of where you can catch fish are never more plentiful than they are right now. You have to be ready to fish everything.
Well, have you noticed last couple of weeks, you'll find them on the graph, you'll find one here, one there. Yeah. They're not grouped. You find one fish, one fish.
On the offshore stuff.
There's no group to them.
So yesterday was the first day, and I mean, what Joe's saying, not only the bass, the bait fish.
They're all just kind of
the yellow bass, the shad, all of it has been scattered and away from the structure and just scattered when you look offshore. Yesterday was the first day, and this is why I say we're right on the front edge of it. It's a great sign that I saw on my electronics offshore fish grouping up on structure again. Most of what I saw was yellow and white bass, but we did see 2 groups of largemouth that were grouped up. They weren't very big groups. There was just a few of them, but it was like shad, yellow bass, largemouth, like what you want to see to think I've got a shot to catch those fish. There was only a few of them out there, though. As we keep going, that number will grow every day right now. So that offshore deal is coming back around. Like 2 weeks from now, we'll be talking about fall offshore fishing at the seminar. I would almost bet you money. Because and like I said, unless the weather heats back up, does something weird from what it has been doing, that offshore deal is going to go down here in the next couple weeks. And what's awesome with that is the back of the creek deal is going to get better and better too. Because right now, we are chasing these fish all over the place. And the more they migrate further into the creeks and pockets, the more isolated they become. And you can kind of pick the type of area that they'll be in. It's a little more predictable. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay.
That's where my game will fly, back the creek.
Oh man, dude, it's so much fun.
That's where I live.
It's always fun in the fall. Excuse me. You get people that aren't used to coming fishing on big lakes or whatever. You never know what you're going to get as a guide for your customers every day. Some of the guys you get are really, really good and really experienced on big water. And some of the guys you get have never been on a lake in a boat. They may know how to cast and set the hook and reel one in. They may have caught 100 million bass, but they have never really been on a boat on a big lake. And it's always fun to watch their reaction when you go, all right, so we're going to go out here and we're going to go to the back of this pocket and we're going to be fishing in this much water. And you go back there and you catch them up pretty good. And then you're doing that and then you're like, all of a sudden you're just like, all right, let's go to 30 foot of water. And they're like, what? Why? Both exist. And I mean, you can look back in the November type videos that we've done on Lake Fork and you'll see that. You'll see us cranking a Movement 80X that dives this deep. And then you'll see us with a big spoon in 25 foot of water catching a head or two. So both do exist. If y'all have any questions anytime, that's my favorite part of these is answering y'all's questions. Because I try to come up with topics that I think can help y'all, but I'd much rather talk about what y'all want answered. So let's go over some different scenarios you can find in East Texas in bait selections that I would use. And Joe, you put your input in here wherever you want to, bud, for different type of situations. So what Joe's talking about, kind of an open bank, sandy bank, not much there, a little bit of timber out off the bank, a little drop off. When you've got that type of situation, like we said, first and foremost, match the size of the bait fish in that area. Okay. Hey, color's not always the deal, right? Like we throw primarily shad pattern lures in the fall because they're focused on shad. But just like with schooling bass that won't bite anything, you know what one of my best baits on schooling bass is sometimes when they won't bite anything else? I'll throw a watermelon seed fluke out there. That doesn't look like a shad at all in color, but it fits the size profile and it stands out from the shad. So sometimes
Wacky worm's real good too.
That lipless crankbait might need to be a red one in the fall. Even though they're feeding on shad, it fits the size profile, it moves like a shad, but it stands out when they've got so many shad to look at. So
you can use that chartreuse and green or chartreuse and blue.
There you go. Chartreuse and blue, that's a great color.
The bright green, bright chartreuse.
Yeah.
They've been hammering it.
Yep. Chartreuse and blue is always a good color in East Texas, but yeah, I do tend to try to match the hatch, but if I get around fish that I know are feeding and they're not biting my shad looking lures, I will go to an off the wall color selection. A chartreuse and blue, an orange, a watermelon, something that looks nothing like a shad, just to try and make it stand out.